The photograph came loose from a stack of orientation packets I was supposed to shred, and I sat there on the break room floor with a paper cutter still humming beside me, staring at it like it had said my name out loud. 11 years since anybody called me by my old nickname, the one that only ever existed inside those hospital walls during my student rotation. In the picture, I'm 19, hair falling out of its clip, standing at the vending machine outside the third-floor break room at Ashgrove General with a bag of pretzels I never actually paid for because the machine ate my dollar twice. And leaning against the wall next to me, not quite in frame, is a tall resident with his badge turned backward and a laugh caught mid-motion, like whoever held the camera surprised him. Marcus Ilori. I hadn't said that name out loud in over a decade, and hearing it in my own head practically knocked the wind out of me. We were nothing official, Marcus and I. That was the thing nobody could ever quite believe when I tried to explain it later, to roommates, to one particularly patient boyfriend who eventually got tired of hearing about a boy from my clinical year. We were two exhausted 20-somethings who kept finding each other in the same stretch of hallway at 2 in the morning, him coming off a trauma consult, me finishing vitals on a full med-surg floor, both of us too tired to do anything but lean against the same wall and split whatever vending machine snack hadn't jammed that night. We talked about everything except the things that mattered, where we were from, what scared us, whether either of us actually believed we'd make it through the year. I liked him in that quiet, terrified way you like someone when you're convinced saying it out loud will break the only good part of your day. Then my rotation ended. His transferred him to a program across the state for his residency match, and that was it. No dramatic goodbye, just a hallway that got quiet, and a version of myself that got packed away along with my student badge and my first stethoscope. I stood up off that break room floor holding the photo, and my hands were shaking a little, which felt ridiculous for a 31-year-old charge nurse who'd talked families through the worst nights of their lives without so much as a wobble in her voice. I turned the photo over. Someone had written a date on the back in pencil, so faded I had to tilt it toward the light. And under the date, 3 words I didn't remember anyone writing. Ask him already. I never did ask him. That was the part that sat heavy in my chest the rest of that shift, refilling supply carts on autopilot while my mind kept looping back to a hallway that didn't exist anymore, since Ashgrove General got absorbed into a bigger health system years ago and gutted for renovations. I wondered, the way you wonder about the version of your life you didn't choose, whether he thought about it too, or whether I was the only one who'd kept a ghost parked in the corner of my memory for over a decade. Maybe you've got one of those too. A person who never became anything, but never quite left either. I didn't go looking for him. I want to be honest about that, because it would be a better story if I'd spent that night scrolling through every social platform I could think of, but I didn't. I put the photo on my refrigerator with a magnet shaped like a caduceus that a coworker had given me as a joke, and I let it sit there for 3 weeks, catching my eye every morning while I made coffee, needling me a little more each day. The universe, or whatever you want to call the specific brand of coincidence that runs a hospital system, decided to answer for me. Our facility got folded into a regional cardiology conference that spring, one of those all-day continuing education things with badge lanyards and bad coffee, and a keynote speaker list nobody reads until they're already seated. I was there for the mandatory hours, half paying attention, scrolling the schedule on my phone under the table, when a name on the afternoon panel stopped my thumb cold. Dr. Marcus Ilori, Interventional Cardiology. I told myself it was probably a different Marcus Ilori. It's not the most common name, but stranger things happen. I told myself that all the way through lunch, all the way through the 2 sessions before his panel, all the way up until he walked out onto that little raised stage in a grey suit that fit him like it had been made for exactly this moment, and my whole ribcage seemed to forget its job. He'd aged into himself the way some people do. All the softness of his 20s settled into something steadier. He talked about outcomes, data, and patient communication with an ease that told me he'd become good at exactly the things he used to be nervous about back when I knew him. Back when he'd admitted, once, at 2 in the morning, that he didn't think he had the right personality for cardiology. I sat in the 4th row with my hands cold around a paper coffee cup, listening to him prove himself wrong to a room of 200 strangers, and I felt something in me crack open that I'd kept sealed for 11 years. I almost didn't stay for the question period. I told myself I had somewhere to be, a shift the next morning, a life that didn't include chasing down a man I hadn't spoken to since I was in scrubs 2 sizes too big. But I stayed in my seat while the room emptied out, and when he stepped down off the stage and started gathering his notes, I made myself walk toward the front instead of toward the exit. He looked up before I said anything, and I watched his face do this thing, this slow unlocking, recognition arriving in pieces before it landed all at once. "No," he said, and he actually laughed, that same laugh from the photograph, older now but unmistakably his. "No way. Ashgrove. The vending machine. You remember the vending machine? I remember it ate your dollar twice and you made me file a formal complaint with facilities. You never actually filed it." I absolutely filed it. Nothing ever came of it, but I filed it. He was still holding his notes, forgotten in his hand, looking at me like he was doing the same math I'd been doing for 3 weeks, trying to reconcile the person in front of him with the one he'd carried around in some back drawer of his memory. "I think about that hallway sometimes," he said, quieter now, like he hadn't meant to admit it, which is a strange thing to think about, 12 years later. A hallway. "I found a photo," I told him, and my voice came out steadier than I expected. "A few weeks ago. You, me, the vending machine. Somebody wrote something on the back." "What did they write?" I almost lied. I almost said something easy, something that wouldn't cost me anything. But I'd spent 11 years being careful, and careful hadn't gotten me anything except a photograph on my refrigerator and a stack of what-ifs I was tired of carrying alone. It said, "Ask him already." He went quiet for a second, and I watched something move behind his eyes, some calculation about risk and timing that I recognized because I'd been running the same one myself. Then he set his notes down on the nearest table, like he needed both hands free for whatever came next. "Well," he said, 12 years is a long time to keep somebody waiting on a question. What was it? And there it was, the whole thing laid bare between us in a conference hallway that smelled like burnt coffee and printer toner. Nothing like that hospital corridor at all, and yet somehow exactly the same conversation, picked back up like no time had passed. I thought about all the versions of that moment I could have had years ago if I'd been braver at 19, all the nights I might have spent differently. And I thought, too, about how some doors don't stay closed forever, how sometimes life hands you the same hallway twice and just asks whether you're ready to walk down it for real this time. "I don't actually remember the question," I admitted, and he laughed again, and something in my chest finally settled. "I think I just have to find out." He held out his hand, not for a handshake, just held it there, open, waiting, the way he used to lean against that break room wall like he had nowhere else in the world he needed to be. I took it, and I thought about that photograph still stuck to my refrigerator door, about the girl in it who never said what she meant, and I wondered if she'd be proud of me now, or if she'd say I'd taken my sweet time getting here. Either way, I finally had my answer. It only took a decade, a shredder, and a stranger's handwriting to get me to ask it.